So we can take some questions. Becky, do you want to join me? And it doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment. It could be 2 comments and a question.
Is this working? I was wondering if I could go back to your, I think this is working, of that difference between LL Cool J and experience.
Yeah. Put up LL Cool J.
Because
Such a good photo.
I think what you're ignoring a little bit there is maybe really good recording practice. And what I mean by that is if you have a really good, and I'm not talking about MP3s, which I know are not as high quality, but say a really good CD or vinyl recording of a concert hall where it's really beautifully mic'd.
Sure.
And you close your eyes and you can really experience a 3-dimensional space out there.
Oh, absolutely. No, I don't mean to denigrate that at all. No, absolutely. I mean, digital tools are powerful and can be used in every which way. But this is more just a question of, I was thinking more of the use of space as we listen to music. I mean, do you know that feeling of when you put on headphones of this in-the-head sensation? Or
Yeah.
And that, I think, is, shall we say, the more typical way that we're hearing music in headphones. But I agree, you can use these tools to build extraordinary sound stages.
Well, what I was wondering when you were saying that was whether it was actually sort of an experientially associative thing of our memory of a 3D space and not actually, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, I see what you're saying, that maybe it's not coming from what you're hearing, but you're reconstructing it for yourself. Well, that gets back to that question of how much signal we can pull out of noise. And definitely we are able to project space and to imaginatively recreate it. But I agree with you. I mean, there are, you can get extraordinary detail from headphones, and I'm not an audiophile. So I haven't in my lifetime had access or really sought out the ultimate equipment that people do. And actually, if you feel like it's rather funny to read the reviews of my book in audiophile magazines, Stereophile and other magazines, because they had a lot, the book was well received by that community, but every time an audiophile wrote about my book, the first sentence said, well, this person's obviously not an audiophile, right? Because I ignored what you're bringing up, which is I ignored the high-end possibilities for digital audio. But partly I ignored it because I just was not interested in it myself. I mean, I totally appreciate it, and when I hear it, I can hear the differences. But I was more interested in it's really a more social question to some regard, which is how do we share music, how do we use it, and how does it enter our stream of information that we exchange all the time, which is different than that sense of the experience of the music when you're just focused in that way. So I do appreciate that distinction. Yeah.
Ryan.
Hello. Hi. So my question is sort of is somewhat connected but different in that I have a question not on the listener side but on the signal processing side. So you ask, what are we losing when we eliminate noise? But what also is gained in the digital processing that could be heard as or created as noise? And I'm thinking here of so many bands now using digital processing to create kind of glitch effects and strange effects with the digital.
Another really good criticism. I totally appreciate that too. That relates again to this. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. Oh, how do we get back to the slides? Sorry about that.
No,
that's the beginning. So here, if we go back to this image, you're absolutely right. Artists can use any tool. And again, I didn't mean to imply that digital tools are not being used creatively, and even digital noise itself. There is the glitch genre is one example. I think also a lot of hip-hop producers right now are really injecting what would have been considered noise into what we're now thinking of as signal in something as mass as pop music, which is really remarkable. Sounds that you might have found only on musique concrète before are suddenly cropping up as the backbeat to a top 10 hit. So there are creative uses for all materials, and there's the possibility that I don't doubt at all that digital is just another material that can be used well or used badly by everybody. But what I really wanted to get at was this idea of what's happening at the other end, really, that the engineers are making these decisions. So again, I mean, I think an artist like this example that we've been given here can take the decisions that have been made by the designers of the digital tools and toy with them. But there's no getting away from the way that we're all using these tools and the way that they're affecting our communicative culture at large, our media, which is very distinct from this kind of use. This is not what everybody's doing with their iPhone. And yet everybody is taking pictures and using pictures and sharing them. And the way that signal and noise are being received now and the way that we share information is, I think, really affected by this technological change. But it's not just a technological change. I think it's ultimately a political thing. It's about who's in charge of making these decisions. You know, again, to go back to the topical moment of Facebook being called up before Congress now, because the question is, who's in charge? Who made this decision that affected, what is it now, 83 billion private users' information? Who made that decision, right? And where are we now that one company, and probably a very small subset of people within that company, made a decision that could be applied in that blanket fashion? And that's a digital artifact, shall we say, as much as a glitch sound or as digital noise in a nighttime photograph. That is a digital artifact. That kind of uniformity and anonymity across such vast numbers was just physically not possible in analog time. You couldn't tap everybody's phone in analog phones. You just couldn't do it, right? It took too much labor. But digital tools eliminate labor. That is among their efficiencies. And another political problem. That maybe these questions are really something that we point to solving, not in technological terms, but in political ones. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
So first of all, I want to say that I really appreciate you bringing it back to the archive, because even when you touched on that earlier, it conjured for me, you know, approaching the archive and getting into the archive and finding something I didn't expect to find, and that taking me in a far different and more interesting direction. So in lines with kind of that thought process of being confronted with something you didn't know you wanted or didn't want to begin with, are there efforts, I'm curious on the sound side, I think of photography and raw files, and this idea of processing in a way that you never do lose the noise entirely, that it's there somewhere in the file. Are there efforts along those lines in recording of preserving the noise, even if it's eliminated for final production?
Yes, that's a great connection to make. That question of the raw data files being saved for photos, there's a direct analogy to audio right now, which is that engineers or producers are saving files in formats that we can't hear, because there are more bits that can be reproduced, essentially. But the idea is that, well, in the future, there'll be a format that can reproduce this or make use of it. So you might as well go ahead, since now storage space has gotten so much cheaper than it was, digital storage space, you might as well go ahead and save this to a greater degree than we can even reproduce it or share it right now, which is kind of the raw idea. The thing I would also bring up about that is that may be similar to photography right now, is the delaying of decision-making in the studio, which happens as a sort of result of this. Because you can keep the processing separate from the media file. So you can record the sound and then have all the decisions happening here and have this endless undo or trees of decisions and redo. And then you can just say, like, oh, the whole thing's wrong, and go back to the beginning. And you've still got this non-destructive editing. So you've got this file that's still the original untouched file with all the data in it. That is resulted in recording processes that tend to be overly long because you can't work so quickly anymore because decisions aren't being made destructively. So you're not stuck with your decisions as you go down the tree. You can always go backwards, right? Whereas in the old days, like in recording studio, when you, say, redid a part, you literally recorded over the part you did before, so you had no chance to go back. Or to go back before multitrack, you just had to do the whole take again and do the whole song again, right? So your decisions were made incrementally. It's like, is that good enough to go on? Or can we not afford any more time in the studio? Yes, so you keep it and you make do. Where I would bring it back to the archive and of searching and finding things you don't know is that when you just have to make do, you live with a lot of mistakes by definition, right? Because you didn't intend to drop the backbeat in this one frame. There's a song on one of our first records where I was the drummer in our first band, and I literally missed the snare drum on one hit, right? So I was playing like a really simple beat, like a sort of predictable, repetitive thing, and I literally like missed the snare drum, so there's like a missing snare hit there. But of course we didn't redo the take for the sake of something like that. And you just live with the mistake. And then you add overdubs. This is multi-track recording at the moment. So we added multi-track overdubs on top, and so you start to kind of layer. You might sort of compensate for the mistake by adding, say, a piece of percussion added later to sort of take up where the space might have been on some other instrument. Anyway, years later, I met a fan of our music who had taken up the drums, and he told me that this was his favorite song from our first record, and what it was all about for him was that amazing way I didn't play this one beat. Right? And it was a pure error. Now, I think the thing that happens in digital technology a lot, at least in the recording studio, I suspect it must happen in photography too, which is the temptation to fix everything you didn't intend to do, right? Which is a version of eliminating the noise. Because if my intention is the signal, then my error is the noise. And the digital tools allow us to get rid of all those errors. And pop music right now, for me, a lot of it has become very dull because it's so free of error. It's free of eccentricity often, despite the very clever uses we were talking about of noise as signal in a lot of pop production. But there's also a lot of sort of extreme predictability for me, for my ears, because you don't hear a lot of people's mistakes. And when I listen to hit songs on the radio from analog recording era, no matter how schlocky they are and how predictable in certain aspects, there's always something going on there in the performing that is not predictable. There's always some horn player who like jumped in with some crazy idea that they didn't bother to get rid of later, because they couldn't. It was too expensive or too awkward to cut it out. There's always a drummer dropping a beat somewhere. There's always a singer who just slightly sharp, but either you choose to read meaning into it or just live with it, but it's part of the signal. It's there, and it's part of the way we communicate. And when we deliberately eliminate all these things that we think we don't intend, we also lose the chance to build on our mistakes. So again, to bring it back to the archive, I think when you find the things you're not looking for, in a way you're building on your mistakes, or you're making use of accident. And there's a great history in art of making use of accident, right? So, and a lot of art that I enjoy, I know, used accident a lot, chance as well. So that's something that I kind of cling to, partly as an aesthetic principle, maybe. But partly I think it's related to this question of what is the noise? Can we be so sure? Mark Zuckerberg thinks he knows. Maybe he does, but I don't think I know, what you should be getting on your page.
Yeah. I think this may be our last question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to tell a brief story about this. I was walking several years ago to Reed Park. It's the largest park in Tucson. It was a Martin Luther King Day, and they were having a rally. I was walking my bike on the sidewalk, and I hear this crash going on. It was over this side. And I got a message, and it said, "Run like hell. Drop your bike, run." Right. One of those, you're in danger. Mm-hmm. So I ran, dropped my bike, and the car circled around, and then it hit my bike. And I maybe have been very injured if I had been wearing those earbuds and not paid attention. Yeah. So now every time I see, especially young people with the earbuds in, you know, walking on the street. I just want to rip them out because what they're doing is they are blocking out
Right.
the noise.
Right. Right.
And that's dangerous.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happening with us and all these denials that we're doing because of our narcissistic culture, just listening to our own little whatever symphony and not listening to this greater environment,
Yeah.
it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm getting from your talk about noise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing anecdote. And in fact, in my book, it starts with something I witnessed on a bicycle, which was a woman wearing earbuds on her bicycle in my neighborhood. Quiet day. It was the opposite of you. She was not in danger, but she suddenly thought she was, and she fell off her bike for no reason. There was nothing coming near her. And I went to help her, and the car, the closest car was really at about like a half a block away, but he came up and stopped too and rolled down his window. It was like, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I got completely self-absorbed." So she was focused on what she was hearing in her head, and then she suddenly realized, I'm on my bike, and she flinched like there's something coming at me, and she just sort of pitched over. And there was no danger. So it was like the negative version of your story, which is that the phantom danger felt real, which is maybe another thing we're seeing happen a lot right now, that we're not judging accurately what is the danger and what isn't.
Yeah, absolutely, especially with climate change
Exactly, yeah.
possibility of nuclear war and all of these major problems that we have that we're just ignoring, denying, not listening to.
Right. Yeah, well, listening to one another is such a basic skill. And that's another reason why I felt that my book, although it's based on sound, might have a lot to say to other aspects of our moment, because I think we're in a sort of crisis of listening at this moment. At the same time, audio is everywhere with us. That's that Apple image of the iPod goes everywhere with you. So I think in a positive way, we're also in a moment when people are very attuned to the possibility of hearing, but then you got to think of how we're listening.
It's a very profound way to end, thinking about the larger ramifications. So Damon, thank you so much
Thank you for inviting
such
me.
an interesting